Rosie, psychic, investigator. I'm Rosie, psychic, investigator. Rosie, psychic, investigator. Rosie, psychic, investigator. Rosie, psychic, investigator. Rosie, psychic, investigator.
So, hi everybody, this is Rosie Psycho-Investigator. It's Friday, September 20th, and I'm talking to Victoria. Victoria is an astrologer from Chicago, and one time I posted one video that she did about the situation connected to Jeffrey Epstein, and we were scheduling to do a follow-up on that, not just a follow-up, but in general, like a look at like how things are developing, and she has her own interesting insights and perspective about what's going on, and so that's what she's going to share with us. And so I am going to let her speak and be and just kind of be in the background here, and then so you see her image, and then when she and I are having a conversation, I'll just be right next to her. And so thank you, Victoria, because we met before, through even probably YouTube first, and then she went to the Patreon channel. But anyway, so let me get started here with Victoria. She's an astrologer in Chicago. So just so you know, and let's get started, Victoria. Okay. So okay, on to you, Victoria. Hello. Okay.
I want to start off, as I always do, with trying to define my terms and what I'm going to be talking about. We're going to have basically two sections. One's going to be a sort of Saturn section, and I'll describe what that means. And then the second one is going to be a Pluto section. I think those are the two major astrological symbols, planets, that have real relevance with the scandal of the Trump administration at this time. And what really applies, the lessons we need to learn actually as a country as we're going through these difficult moments. And so without further ado, we're going to discuss Saturn right now of 1776, when the idea of this country was founded. There's more than one astrological chart for the United States. There's a great one for the Constitution, but that is not the one that I use. I use the Declaration of Independence. And you will see that chart, because Rosie is going to show it to you. And right now, Saturn is very strong to our sun sign. Everybody knows what their sun sign is. As a country, we happen to be a Cancer sun sign. And Saturn. So Saturn is touching its own position, and it's touching our sun. So what does that mean? And when is that happening? It's happening very strongly right now in August through October. I would like to look very strongly, maybe with Rosie in a bit, around the date of October 8th. And then again around January 13th, 2020. Those are another set of dates that are specific, where I think things can congeal in terms of the lessons we have to learn, the problems we might face, how we can address the challenges from Saturn at that time. So what is Saturn? Saturn stands for our fears, our weaknesses, and the negative patterns that we have built in response to those fears and weaknesses. They're inherent in our characters. We're all born with a Saturn. It's not something that we did particularly wrong. Everyone has one. It's just that some people call it karma. And it's the difficult kind, where as you sow, so shall you reap. Those negative things that we do at some level require a price to be paid. So sometimes those prices are to do with looking at our fears, looking at our weaknesses. Sometimes they're to do with looking at our past. What have we done as a country in the past, which can reflect perhaps poorly or well on us right now. What obstacles are we facing? Those obstacles generally are associated with looking our fears in the face. Saturn also stands for things like the past, older people. So when we talk about things like the age of our leaders, you hear the voice of Saturn, you know, so is it appropriate that someone is as old as they are for them to run for president? You know, that kind of thing. Saturn is also very closely associated with the law, with the police, with judgment, and building better discernment and judgment about what is right, what is wrong, how can we deal with that. So those are sort of the negative aspects of Saturn. As we learn to handle Saturn a bit better, we become more mature, we become more realistic about what we can expect, but it never happens quickly. You know, a lot of people have been talking for a long time, Rosie and various other people, you know, why is it not happening now? You know, why is it taking so long, right? It's taking so long because it's Saturn, right? Saturn always makes it feel like you're having to wait twice as long as you need to for your result. And so Saturn is cautious. It teaches you perseverance. It teaches you patience. And so, you know, it's important. Those are important lessons for us to learn as we react to the negative things that might be happening around us. It also is very helpful to us when we look at leadership issues. You know, what makes a good leader? You know, whether we're trying to pick a new one or we're looking at our current leaders, and it makes their flaws much more visible. And also the responsibility of leadership, you know, to whom much is given, so much is expected. You know, we have a responsibility as a people who have a lot to help those who perhaps don't have as much. However, the thing that often happens with Saturn is it makes you very aware of what you want for yourself and makes you very aware of your ambition. And there's absolutely, again, nothing wrong with ambition. But the important thing is to not allow that ambition to overrun, right? The main problem with Saturn is, in my view, the symbol itself is the cross of matter over the crescent of soul. That's the way it actually looks. It's like this cross here, and then there's like a little crescent shape underneath it. And that means that the material world is elevated above the spiritual. And that can create a negative blowback, if you will, a negative set of patterns that we have to try to combat. So I think that's the sort of the things that Saturn stands for in a nutshell. And so in our chart as a country, Saturn is connected to the sun. Sun is your identity. Sun is who you are. It is what gives you consciousness. It's the life-giving power of the sun. We wouldn't be here if there wasn't an actual literal sun for that solar life-giving energy. And it is part of the sun always in the chart describes a heroic path. So when the sun is connected to Saturn, it often means it takes time for one to learn about how to be appropriate, how to overcome negative patterns, how to deal with perhaps criticism, judgments, negative strictures. And so if you look back at the country back in 1776, we were moving against being ruled by a king. That's our past, you know. We are moving toward a future that you know, we did move toward a future which doesn't have a king, right? But there is some sort of thing always with Saturn. There's like a bell that's ringing in the back of our ear. There's something ringing of the past. So that sometimes when you see that the Trump administration is acting a little bit like their kings or their emperors or something like that, that's not something that we wanted to have. We tried to guarantee that we would not have it. So this is part of the heroic path that we have, is to learn to stand up for in the face of our fears and our weaknesses and whatever authoritarian negative elements there are out there, and learn through them, not to repeat past negative patterns. Okay, so because we have the Sun and Saturn where it is, and you'll see the graphic. It is in the 7th house, which is the house of Libra house. It's the house of all men are created equal. And Saturn is the house of leadership. So we were destined on some level to be leaders, despite any weaknesses we might have. And so what it discusses, when you have the Sun and Saturn there, it looks at what role are you meant to play in society or on the world stage. Because Saturn is connected to things like being, very law-abiding, or very sort of connected to judgment and or things like policing. One of the things that we've done quite naturally as we've matured as a country is to become the policeman of the world. There are a lot of people that don't like that as a role, but that is one option, and it's one of number of options. Okay. The problem with Cancer as a sun wants to be very expansive. We want to hug the world. We want to feed the world. We want to nurture the world. I mean, we want the world to be one big happy family, and the US to be, mom and apple pie. That's what Sun in Cancer tells us. When Saturn comes along, it'll say, but there are limits here. We're afraid of giving all of this to other people. We're going to sort of portion things out. We're going to hold back. And so we create barriers, boundaries, saying, I'll only give this much. And always with Saturn, it's best to do the middle path. You can't give everybody everything, but nor do you deny them everything. You have to find the middle road, the great sort of Buddhist middle road. So, for example, if you're fearful of out of control forces coming from the outside, like, refugees or things of that nature, part of the natural character is, I want to take care of these people. I want to love these people. I want to hug them. The other part of the national character is, I'm a little fearful of the outsider, so I want to create a barrier. Well, what kind of barrier can I create? A wall. So that's, or, if rather than trying to feed the world and give the world grains and corns and soybeans and whatever else, I'm going to put tariffs. I'm going to blockade. So anything that creates boundaries because of an attempt to either control or to deal with our fears, sometimes those are one and the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. So I've noticed recently, particularly, as I said, because it's really strong right now in August through October, the tariff issues have been a big deal. They are starting to constrict the economy. Saturn acts as a natural constrictor. When you start to feel Saturn operating with you, you feel a little cool or a little cold, as if things are not warm, things are not enveloping, things are not inviting. And so with the Sun in the 7th house, it's really important for us to have good relationships. Not only do we believe in, all men are created equal, in theory, until Saturn gets involved and tells us we can't do it that way. We also want to have good relationships, which in our world means good allies. So what happened during this period? The G7 occurred, and Trump was kind of shunted aside, saying, we're just not even going to deal with you right now, because the way that you're trying to control things is not by creating a consensus, by creating a really positive negotiation. You're trying to control it, to do it your way. So I would like to say, in closing for this specific issue, what we have to look at when Saturn gets really strong is what type of leadership do we want as a country? This is really super important. I would say competence is probably one of the main things Saturn can offer. So which of your candidates perhaps that you're looking at right now are competent? Which ones can stand in their fear and whatever weakness they have and still stand up to it? When we're judging people like the current leadership, how are they negatively constricting things? How are they recreating negative patterns? And we then have to also look at ourselves and say, if I'm getting really fearful about what Trump is doing, or I'm fearful about what Barr is doing or whatever, how can I deal with my own fears so that I can then bring a solid energy into the collective space and make a difference myself? Because we all are maturing through this. We're all having to look at this realistically. This is not pie in the sky. Saturn is nothing about what our hopes and dreams are. It's not about the way we'd like the world to be. It is the way the world is right at this moment. So anyway, I think that's one of the things I wanted to get across. Another couple of dates that I think are going to be really important that are Saturn related, but they're connected to two other planets, and I'll talk about what each one means, are Mercury to Saturn. This is particularly important, and I'll tell you why in a minute, and then Venus to Saturn. Okay, so those are the two we're going to look at. So what is Mercury? Mercury stands for communication, the logical mind, the way you can bridge understanding between two sets of people who don't perhaps have that much in common, or that don't understand what you do for a living. You can explain it to them, but it's often better to have like an agent or someone who can bridge that gap. So we need bridges of understanding between people. We also need to be able to do multidisciplinary work. We need to juggle aspects of our lives. Mercury stands for making decisions, gathering data and information. What happens when Saturn comes along? It blocks your data. It blocks your information. It blocks you from making those bridges of understanding. So when things like, for example, this is particularly strong around September 22nd, by the way. So what happens when that occurs? You get somebody denying information from the White House about something very, very important that could be crucial in a legal case, crucial in understanding what's really going on. Saturn will attempt to control the stream of information, control being able to perceive and understand things as it really is, not as fake pretend is, but the actual data, the actual facts, right? So often when we're looking at Saturn, with Mercury, with Saturn, it's more difficult to be flexible. It's more difficult to actually hear when someone is asking you a question, what are they really saying back to you? Are they hearing what you're saying? Are they good at discernment? This is something we have to understand as a country. If we're not perceiving the truth because somebody is withholding the facts, are you able to discern that? Are you able to figure out, are you analyzing your data correctly? Are you accounting for the information correctly? And Saturn challenges you to take extra time to persevere and to make sure you're getting the right end of the stick. Otherwise, you can, for example, with clients, I'll say, it's often a little difficult to sign a contract under Mercury-Saturn because often there's some piece of data or information that's missing. So that's an important thing to look at. The other thing that's important to look at is Venus-Saturn. This is going to be important on September 25th, December 11th, and in the spring, like around March, early March of 2020. Told myself I wasn't going to go that far into the future, but anyway, there you have it. So what is Venus? What does Venus stand for? It stands for values, love, money, income, possessions. It's how you gather what you desire to you. So it's, you know, wise to perhaps someone might put on makeup before you go out at night because you think you might be more attractive, and what you desire is more likely to come to you. It doesn't have to be that necessarily, although Venus stands for the erotic, desirable woman, where in astrology the moon stands for the maternal woman. So as Venus goes, it's very much about learning about love, desire, and attraction. And when you feel good about yourself, when you achieve some form of self-love, one of the good things is you have a more likelihood of attracting a good salary. You know, you value your time, you value your efforts, and you're also likely to be able to create a better income. The problem when Saturn gets again in the mix, it tends to create obstacles. So it's more difficult for you to feel good about yourself potentially as a woman at that time. It may make you feel difficult to feel valued. It may make it more difficult to ask for a raise around times like that. And so the problem is, as Saturn will try to control the areas of love, attraction, and money, it will attempt to control resources. Those resources that will go to you, those resources that will not. So often I think things like emoluments, because Venus stands for money, the fact that people try to curry favor with Trump by going to his hotels or his resorts or things of that nature. The fact that perhaps during that period, you might have a diminution of the value of women. You know, a lot of important women in politics right now. Sometimes, whether it be the squad or other people, they are devalued, and it sort of blows back at women. And really one wants to nurture women and bring them up. So there's an element that can be of misogyny, either self-dislike or, you know, sort of a negative judgment about the female. And it's also important when you're looking at Venus in general, you have to look at relationships. So relationships, again, between the US and other people, that would be between the US and other countries. You know, what kinds of relationships are we having at those times that can be in some way either diminished, constrained? Are there walls or boundaries going up at that time? That sort of thing. So I would love to turn it over to Rosie to see if she would like to participate a little bit in a discussion through her tarot cards of how Saturn might play in to some of these dates.
Because I feel like you were talking about the relationships, but it's not clear to me. I felt like I guess I'm a little bit confused as to well, the things you talked about is how it's going to affect the U.S. Is that correct? Because I thought you were like kind of discussing kind of like the aspects, but not necessarily specifically. So just to get like a summary of this. So you're saying the thing, I understand, I took all these notes about Saturn and how it's constricting the things that I just, and correct me if I'm wrong, okay, that I just highlights is the issues of the tariffs. You talked about how the tariffs constrain between August and October, like constraining the economy, and how the relationship, like Saturn being constrainment, so constraining the economy, constrain the relationship between the idea of the wall, right? It's almost like, as if the values of it's because it feels like, generally speaking, the U.S. has been pretty open, you know, feels relatively open, but now it's almost like there's this force of like containment, right? You would say that what they call, what is it they call, like the, you know, America, whatever, if there's such a thing as America first, whatever it is isolation, right? And I know this is very much what you're describing, is a sense of like greater isolation, right?
Right.
And also, just so connecting to what you're saying, I think we're seeing now also the stuff with the allies, right? Even with this, this, I guess, called pseudo war with Iran, it seems like if they're almost making these decisions thinking that the world is what it used to be, right? When you could count on allies, but now it's like, well, you don't like us, we don't like you either. You know, they're like, okay, well, we're not getting involved.
Yeah.
So good luck with that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like it's kind of like, it's almost like we're reaping what we with Trump, right? He said all these things, we don't agree with him, but the other countries are like, okay, we get it. You don't want to help. We don't want to help either. So, and this is like the payback. The same thing with China, right? That China is like, okay, you know, I'm going to do this in China. China's like, okay, wait, see you later. I found other people who can give me soy, who can give me other things. So it's not just a one-way street, right? It's like, what does isolation mean also if, you know, with the world at large, right?
Right.
So that is that. And then like also, but you're talking about, now just to again, just make sure I understand here correctly, like the issue of a Mercury and Saturn, and you're talking about the lack of flexibility in terms of like they're trying, you know, they're constraining, how to say it, they're kind of like
they're constraining the free flow of information.
Oh,
you know,
perfect. See, constraining the free flow of information. Exactly. Wow. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
So this is like, it's right. Exactly. So it's kind of like I think before, I mean, just as from the sense like we've had so much gaslighting, but now it's like really cover-ups, right? It's really almost like cover-ups, constantly cover-ups.
Yes. So I would say something like the news being criticized for what it's attempting to report. Things like diminishing the free flow of information, or even more importantly, things associated with impeachment decisions, because Mercury is very connected to any decision you choose to take.
So no, but go ahead. So are you sort of saying that this is a good time for impeachment or not? It's not clear to me what you mean.
I think always with Saturn, it's almost as if you're forced into a decision that you feel uncomfortable making. And so you try to put it off as long as you can. And that's the date around 9/22. And I think the decisions that are made around that time should clarify what the decision actually is. There's something else that's coming up later that's also Mercury that could present a decision, but by then you'll be in a situation where you're so between a rock and a hard place, you don't have a choice. Here, there's still a choice. The choice isn't a great one. It's a choice where you're gonna have to deal with some judgment or criticism about the decisions you make at that time. But I think it could be that as well. So it's likely to be some big news story or news that's kept from coming out. It could be blockage of information into sort of legal proceedings of some sort, or it could be connected potentially to impeachment decisions, because my feeling is that Saturn is one of the things that will call him to account. Trump is very Saturn averse. He doesn't like, he's never seen a rule he doesn't want to break, ever. And Saturn really is in charge of the rules. So Saturn is going to have to be part of the judgment structure that occurs in order to take him out. And as we look to take him out through legal channels, that Saturn is going to be one of the things we're going to follow.
Oh, okay. So
now in terms of emoluments, that's another route. Often with Mercury, when Mercury is very prominent, you get two options. It's a sign of duality, right? So you have more than one way to skin this cat. And I think that Mercury, you know, obstruction associated with Mercury and or things associated with love or money. And that's where Venus-Saturn comes in.
Mhm.
So things that are, you know, to do with emoluments and things of that nature.
Okay. So so I feel like I'm cutting the cards here, but I just feel like it would be interesting to see what happens on the 20th, which is in a few days. Like, is that right?
Yeah.
Like on Monday. Is that Monday? I think it is.
Yeah, it's something like right around the corner.
Yeah. So Friday, that's right. No, Sunday.
Because
Sunday.
I was going to make dates earlier.
Mhm.
And there's one earlier date that's going to be important when I do the next section.
Mhm.
But I thought there's no point because we weren't going to get together till today. So.
Wow. Yeah, no, because so I'll look into the 22nd. So, but just broadly speaking, and let me know if you want to do it now or maybe you want to continue the other part, but or after you do the other part. But I feel like, do you feel like it's, because that's what I think myself and maybe others have been seeing, is that this is maybe a time. Do you think things look positive for Trump leaving? Is it possible from what you're seeing that he could leave or no, or later or not? What do you think?
I think he will leave. I don't think it's right now.
Okay. What do you mean? Like, do you have a time thing?
Yeah, I have a total timeline. I've got a date in mind, actually.
Oh my God, tell me. So
I was going to give you that date toward the end.
No, because you know what it is like, I feel like for me, you know, because I don't know much about astrology. It's interesting, but I think if you give me the, you know, kind of we can look at it later, but like if you just because that was, as we were talking about this. So what is like, what do you see? I mean, you can discuss the details later, but if you, you know, what is roughly?
I think it's January 2020.
Oh, okay. Well, not that far, right? No.
It would have been far if I'd said something like that to you a year ago. It's not really all that far anymore.
Wow.
I don't think it's going to happen right now. I mean, that's the problem with Saturn, and Saturn and Pluto are in the sign Capricorn, which is Saturn's sign. So everything is moving like molasses, like some cement.
Oh, interesting.
It is
That's
the
right.
way, you know, it's Capricorn's an earth sign.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't move quickly like a lovely Gemini or something like that, or fast like a fire sign. The energy moves like a mudslide, except it takes a while for the hillside to become so saturated that eventually it moves. So I think my sense with Saturn is really, we're talking about something where we're having to be, they always talk in astrology about Saturn like a polisher of diamonds. Diamonds are so hard and they're so precious, and the way that you cut the gemstone is what creates the value.
Okay.
So I think we're just being put through a process that creates something that, with that kind of pressure and intensity, that is eventually something of value.
Okay.
But it takes time.
Okay.
Because Saturn is the timekeeper. So my feeling is right now, that's where I'm going. Yeah. So why don't we look something, you know, at the intermediate steps between now and then, and those are some of the dates I've given you.
Okay. So let's, you know, what do you think of looking at, like, that'll be Sunday, right? That's 9/22.
Yeah. So Mercury-Saturn happens 9/22, and Venus-Saturn happens 9/25. So that's two aspects this coming week.
Okay. So let's see here. I'm going to, you know, a little bit calm. Let me just see. I don't know if let me just do, I don't know if I do this like this. Okay. Let's look complicated here. Just let me think. Okay. So let me just see here. Quick. Oh, sorry. I have my. So interesting. Yeah. No, it's very interesting because, you know, for me, even for like hearing, it makes perfect sense what you're saying, even though it's like a little bit anxiety inducing, because of course I want Trump to leave like tomorrow. You know, it's kind of like, oh my God, he's still around.
Who doesn't?
Unreal.
I mean, you know, who doesn't?
I'm like shuffling here. Do you think, this is a question, kind of an important question, may or may not be related. Do you feel like the military is related to Saturn? Or
yes.
No, it is. Okay,
absolutely.
Good. Oh, good. Okay, so it is plausible.
Yeah.
That if need be, that the military, because it's sort of like what, you know, because what you're describing, that Saturn being these like institutions that have lasted for a long time. Because the little I know that about astrology, I was like, oh, Mars is the aggression thing, but in this case, it's not the point. The point is more like the institution of the military, right? it would be something
Right.
like that.
Mars is certainly the god of war, but the military exists regardless of the war. So the leadership structure, it's a very hierarchical organization. Saturn rules hierarchical organizations, whether they be corporate or military or anything of that sort, through which discipline is exerted, and the sort of the lower levels have to follow certain rules. That's a very typical Saturn structure. And the other interesting thing that I wanted to mention, as we're looking to possibly looking into the cards, is the Russian Federation, which was born on December 25th, 1991. If you look at when the USSR was dissolved, has a very strong connection to our Saturn in the chart. So a lot of times when Saturn is prominent, Russia will come up as a big deal.
Oh, interesting. How interesting.
Yeah.
So now this would be, now this, I'm just doing the cards quickly here for, let's say 22nd. Okay. Wow, how interesting. Okay, so Victoria, when you're talking about, okay, I'm just already like thinking about it. Like, okay, so you're talking about the January, Trump leaving in January. Do you think that like that would be the final? Because, for example, is it possible that something could start now but finish in January?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
good.
For example, let's say they decide to proceed with impeachment in, say, end of September or October or something like that, or even into early December. Then they go away on recess over Christmas, and then they come back and they take the vote. At which point, hopefully, the idea is they'll have enough data to sink him, and he will not want to put himself in that position. But that's much more Saturn with Pluto than just Saturn on its own.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. So, okay. Interesting. So, yeah, here. Just have to move. Okay, next. Okay, so. Okay. Oh, wow. Look, interesting. So, okay. So, yeah, so this indicates this is the world upside down. So, I think we're talking about the Ukraine scandal here. It could very well be something like that. Because this is the White House here, the secret has a secret connected to some sort of guilt. And this is the world upside down, money issues that are going to be judged. And then we have here now the party and the child crying and the exposure of the enemy and the military here and wanting to live in the, I would think that they remember how there was a whole thing with the military aid to Ukraine, depending on whether they would be willing to investigate the guy, I think is the son of Biden. And so it's like the dream. It's like he believes that he's willing to create everything so that because this is kind of like the guy, oh, look, I'm longing for something. Oh, this is my dream. But he is willing to change the whole path of the country just for his own whims, basically. And this is the friend upside down. So in some ways, also turning, and in a way, I feel like it reminds me a bit of what you were saying about Saturn. Like you kind of constrain the friendships, and you wanting to turn the friend, the former ally, into an enemy, right? To say, okay, I don't want you. Or if we had a relationship before, now it's going to be a quid pro quo where you give me something. Here have the secret, right? You have to give me a secret or do something in secret if you want this money. Okay, so this will be the judgment. Okay, so that would be the 22nd. Then you said that was Mercury and Saturn, right? Is that that's what
Mercury and Saturn. That seems a little bit like, that judgment card makes me very interested in wondering what will occur around that time. Yeah.
Right, and I'm just getting more here because then a few days later, that would be the 22nd is Sunday, and then the 25th is probably like Thursday or Friday of next week, right? So. That would be, oh my God, look, this is why it's like the ending. This is why, because I feel like in some ways things look really bad, like really, really bad for Trump. Okay. And so here we have, oh, wait, did I say, okay, no, I already, sometimes I do that. I get the wrong, wait, what am I? Okay, here, this is, so, okay, so here is, yeah, so So here we have now, this is another card that it could be about home, and sometimes it could be the country, but this is the White House upside down and ending. Now the gran signore is usually, I always talk about how Trump is actually, he's like this always, because he's the fake rich person, and this is the actual rich person. So it makes a lot of sense that it could be some sort of oligarch. And this is a woman, this usually has to do with losses. Oh my God, look at this. I pulled another card just to clarify. And this is the White House again, upside down. The same, very similar to this one here, okay? So here we have the White House in disarray because it's some sort of donor, I would think, connects here. Now we have here the victory upside down. There's some sort of shady victory, the boss, or personal finances, business, and losses. And this combination has been coming up a lot. You know, the idea, I think this to me refers to the bankruptcies of Trump in the past, because then you have the guy doing a business with him to help him. And look, what we have here is the smoking gun evidence. So that would suggest that whatever happened then is the smoking gun evidence. And this is a card of government or law or some sort of institution. And this is madness. So in a way, the government has, and this is a letter upside down. So it could be that whoever, that I would think here, this suggests something a little bit different from the thing with Ukraine. I think this is even more stuff connected to Trump's finances. Could be the Deutsche Bank thing. I don't know how that's going, but that's what it looks like to me a little bit. It's more. Yeah. So in a way it would connect with, does it make sense, Victoria?
It would connect to Venus more, because Venus has very strong implications with finance.
Oh,
and income and possessions. So it also could be to do with, for example, if he's got big donors he has to please, or Republicans do, and they're very unhappy about something, that they could be suffering criticism from them and saying, get your boy into line, because there are certain things about this we do not appreciate.
Yeah, because there's something, and I remember a long time ago, I think I told you even like in the past, I'm a little bit scared of astrology because like people have done, I know I get so scared if they tell me something, but I remember the thing about Venus, they were saying that, I remember they said, oh, your chart has like Venus, and it's like making money from beautiful things. So there's something, I remember this story like a long time ago, but I remember I'm saying this about Trump because it's making me think of something about his money. A lot of times, this would Manafort, I remember too, that the money for them is about appearances. It's like, how, for example, you have the guy from, what's his name? The guy from Nebraska, right? I forgot.
Warren Buffett.
Yeah, he's obviously very wealthy, but he's not a Venus money type guy.
Right.
He's not the person who's like, oh, look at it. Trump is exactly, it's all about the appearance of money, right, to me. And so in this sense, it makes perfect sense to me, like you're saying, the thing about it makes perfect sense. It's sort of like to Trump, like if you put the two of them, let's say it's probably, I don't know what, to me, I feel like Warren Buffett is like the real money, like true money, right?
Sure.
And Trump is the Venus. So it's like for him, money is all about appearance, which is interesting because this is what it is a suggestion, is that the way that in the past, all the cards talk about Trump, there's a lot of appearance thing that in a way that the relationship he seems to have with the donors or the sugar is like the sugar daddy type relationship where like, right, I'll give you the clothes or I give you the look. But actually you're not a moneymaker, you're not a businessman, and in reality, you're a facade. Everything about Trump seems, and so in that sense, it actually makes sense, Victoria, that you talk about the Venus. That's like, when the perception changing, you know what I mean? Is that right?
Well, and also in Trump's chart, you showed this in the last little blurb I did for you. His Venus and Saturn are together in his chart. He was born with these two operating throughout his entire life. So it gives him a flaw in being able to make money and to feel good about himself. And in order for him to feel good about himself, he acquires stuff. He acquires beautiful women, he acquires beautiful properties. It's sort of, rather than feeling really good inside or loved inside, he doesn't. That's why I sort of ended with that piece, because he's trying to fill a hole that cannot be filled, because it was he doesn't understand how to do that, right? And so he gets all this stuff, he just needs more stuff and more stuff and more stuff. And there's just never enough. So when Saturn comes along, it basically sort of it puts the squeeze, right? And so it makes you act more fearful. So with being Trump being who he is, in that he feels fearful anyway of loss, and he has lost everything before. Let's face it, he's lost stuff before. So he's fearful that it's going to happen again, and he will act out because of that. So and also he fears the really wealthy people telling him, you know, what to do, judging him, not including him, all that kind of stuff. Because he doesn't really feel like the well-liked person, because he really isn't. You know, and he would, you know, so yeah. So I would imagine he'll get some form of criticism during both of these periods, but for slightly different reasons, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking, if okay, so this is what I'm thinking, Victoria. If you have more, because I still feel like I'm kind of intrigued still by the thing about him. So because lately there's a lot of these cards that's like the end is the end of Trump, but it's possible that the end is now, but then it's like the door is closing then, you know, like back in January, you know what I mean?
Well, I think there's going to be a period of negotiation. I think Nancy's playing her cards pretty well. Yes, she's delaying things, but I think this is going to give us time to negotiate. What is the exit strategy? If I were Nancy, for example, I'd be sure that part of the exit negotiation is that he never opens his mouth about politics again and never runs again.
Oh, okay.
For example. So, because his followers will be willing to, you know, it's like Napoleon.
Oh, that's right. I see what you're saying.
Helena or whatever.
Sort of the Roger Stone thing, right? Like where you can't, like you have an NDAs in a way, right? Like,
right. So I think you're going to have to get him to agree to a lot of stuff, which I think originally he's not going to agree to. You know, if you cut him a check big enough, he might take it. But I think a lot of people would be upset if taxpayers have to fund his exit.
Exactly.
On the other hand, you know, we want to have him exit. So what are we willing, you know, I think that gets into the Pluto conversation we'll have in a few minutes. The strategies, the sort of chess game that's being played right now, I think my feeling is behind the scenes, so that you can leave him an exit that he will then take. And it has to be the exit you want him to take.
Okay.
And I think, you know, yeah, so that would be what I would say about that.
So then I will move to Pluto, right? Is that
yes,
you want to talk about Pluto?
Right.
I think we're settled. I think that, this is the thing. I have one question that maybe just quickly with the cards. Because the thing is like, so is there a negotiation going on? Because that's what we were talking about, right? Like if it's ending or it has ended, but is this a process like starting, let's say now-ish until January 20th, you said, right? Is this going to be a negotiation part? Like just quickly. Okay, so what's going on here? Just quickly, because yeah, and it's funny because I've been seeing it a lot, this negotiation thing, but what happens is that Trump is kind of, you know, he's obviously like negotiating in bad faith. So he's kind of like, you know, essentially bullshitting, you know what I mean? He's like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. And he's like, what about this? What about that? And that's what I thought, that eventually the military is going to come, because they're like, you know what? He's not going to leave. He's just kind of like his whole life he's done this, right? He's like, yeah. And then he's like, he really strong arms people into giving up and thinking that he can, you know, he's like, oh, whatever, so that's what I feel. Let me just look here quickly, just to show, 1 second, removing this. And then I think that will show, okay, 1 sec. Okay, so here we have, just quickly to show the negative. Yeah, this is interesting because the sun is something negative coming out, trying to assert him. Okay, was it like this? Yeah. So, okay, just quickly. So interesting because, and I think usually to me, considering all the cards they use, the tarot is sort of the emotional states. So we have here the sun, the negative discovery, and this is the fake servant, the fake, and the sick person and losses. So that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing that he's not really serving the country, that he's not well, and that there's a lot of corruption. So he's trying to assert himself still in private. He's still pushing his agenda, even though this has been exposed. But then there's some sort of happiness, and he's not taking it seriously. You know what I feel like is interesting? Even the Fox card to me, in this case, it actually resonates as the Fox News, because we have he's pretending, he's playing dumb. So in some ways, there's a lot of negative. Basically, what you're discussing about communicating, the Mercury-Saturn thing, communication, right? Kind of like creating false news items and those kinds of things as a means to try to it reminds me of like you have some sort of wound, there's like war movie, somebody has a wound, let's try to stop it and but at the same time, and this is the techniques that he's using, okay, so it makes sense. But eventually how will he leave? Here we get what we want. Okay, interesting. Just how
those are offers, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. Offer.
Yeah.
This is a message. Now, getting what we want to message. And okay, so just quickly here, just to get the cards out, and then see, because it's interesting, because we have, he really is not. I mean, he's definitely not Nixon. You know what I mean, in the sense that like here, this is getting what we want. The fortune upside down, the protector, and the offer. So it's like he's so transactional. The problem is that he's in real danger if he leaves, right? When there's a message about the shady meeting, there's a lot of evidence of his crimes. And so this is cutting, right? This is the thing that has to be, this is the eliminating factor. And then we have, again, the offer that he may have taken from the mob, the quid pro quo, and everything's exposed. So it's interesting, because it's sort of like the more he tries to hide the truth, the more it pushes back. You know what I mean? It's kind of interesting. Like he's like no, and then it's like pushing. And I remember, from the few times that the one astrologer I saw, because I have not to talk about myself, but like I have a Saturn on the 6th house, and the 6th house for me is like the house. What is it? Work. Yeah, and it's like I forgot which. Oh, Leo. They say it's really bad because Leo is an expensive thing. Like is one of those. What is it called? He's like, I don't remember this. I'm sorry.
Leo's it's not so much expensive, it's creative. But it's somebody who likes big things. It's kind of a dramatic quality.
So I always
sign.
Yeah, so the person, I remember the one was like, yeah, but nothing for you is gonna happen easy, and like it's only when you're older. It's true. It's interesting, you know what I mean? Like, it's interesting how, but anyway, so just thinking of when he said that, the thing about the Saturn, I remember she said something like, there's a lot of, it's almost like, there's a mountain. It really feels like the Saturn is like the big mountain. Like you think no matter how much effort you put into something, it's a mountain versus you, and you're little. You know what I mean? So even if you're huge, the mountain is still a mountain. And so, it is what it is. Yeah. So you want to have, it's almost like in order for you to win over a mountain, you have to have the same momentum. Sort of like you have to be, down, there's something where you can't be fighting against it. It has to be on, you know what I mean? You have to almost like, for example, it's a weird example, but sort of like, let's say you're going to build a house and there's a huge mountain. You can't try to, it has to adapt to the limitation. You know what I mean? So yeah. It's kind of interesting. So then if I see Trump, he's trying to, this is probably the biggest mountain. Like he's fighting the U.S. government, you know what I mean? He's the most powerful position. And yet we think that he doesn't seem to have limits, right? He doesn't, that's what I think one of the most frustrating things. But what we're seeing is that actually there are limits. It's just that they are not as visible to us as he is, right? Yeah. Right. The limit seems, it's almost like he has this magical ability to make limits and laws look like they are bendable, but ultimately not,
Well, he does have something, I mean, I don't want to cover it today because we're sort of directing in another area, but he's got something that's in his chart, which is the Teflon planet. It's the planet Uranus, and it's right next to his sun. So it's one of the things that makes him rule averse. So he doesn't accept those limitations for himself. He doesn't think that those rules apply. So Saturn to him, every time he's exposed to it, feels super uncomfortable. And, you know, even if he doesn't show it, his weakness gets activated, and his fears get activated, and his negative patterns come out of the closet. But the other thing I meant to mention, and I thought maybe you would want to look into this or maybe not, but the main thing associated with Saturn for him is the 5th and the 11th houses. Saturn rules the 5th house, which is a house of children, and it rules the 2nd house from the 4th, the 4th being the house of real estate, and the house next to it is income from real estate. So the 5th house is his income from real estate and his kids. And Saturn is sitting in the opposite house, which is the 11th, and that is income from your career, and it is in-laws of your kids. So that would be Jared. And now the interesting thing, out of the 3 older kids, who are the ones that are sort of in business with him, right? 2 out of the 3 are Capricorns. Capricorn is the sign associated with Saturn, and Jared is a Capricorn. So all 3 of them are going to be very connected to Saturn. So that's another thing we got to think about. When he gets, if he's going to be afraid for something, he may think he's Teflon, but his kids are not Teflon. So one of the things that may be used down the road to leverage him out are the kids.
So, so can I, because, okay, so can I ask you something? Maybe, like you said, maybe it's a little bit off topic, but I don't know, maybe this is where it could also be something you're alluding to, is that I always have this feeling whenever I've done readings that, Jared's fate is sealed to me. If, you know, there's no way, out of everybody, he's not going to escape. He's going to, you know, he's boom, like he's going to be, locked and never see. I feel like he could be life in prison, or if even death penalty or something. But I always felt that Ivanka would turn on him. I always felt that she would turn on him. You know, because I think they're both Isn't they? They're like, is she Capricorn?
Ivanka's not a Capricorn, she's a Scorpio. So she's in Pluto territory. What we talk about next is what Ivanka is influenced by. And Pluto is if Saturn is difficult, Pluto is its ugly twin, and it's not a twin, it's really a much more powerful planet, much more strategic, much more difficult. And so that's what Ivanka is. She's related to the planet Pluto.
Okay.
And so she's a little different. But Eric and Don and Jared are all basically all Capricorns, and therefore highly influenced by. So interestingly enough, you know, we typically say the sins of the father are visited upon the kids, right? And that's definitely true. Saturn stands for the sins of the father, or as you sow, so shall you reap kind of thing. These kids all the 3 of them have father issues. Donald and Eric, and so does Jared. Yeah. So that's a sort of a theme as well.
So just to quickly confirm, so are they going to suffer legal, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be some legal ramifications for them.
Oh, look,
I don't, it's just a question of timing, because I've looked at their charts, I just haven't studied them, right? I've studied Trump.
Yeah, interesting. Because right away, even without the other cards, it's interesting because this is a card of chaos. It's all change like this, but like this is like when it goes too much, it's chaos. And then we have the devil, right? It's enough. It's about exposing the lies, or the devil. Everything that was, there was like an illusion falls up, it comes apart, I think. Okay, and then this is the compromised people, right? It's like the ones they are involved. So it's interesting because if you look at this card, it has the rope. And when you look at the devil, it's like he's holding people by, you know what I mean? So you could almost argue that these people here are like this, the compromised people that kind of have done deals with the devil. They're part of the illusion. Yeah. Okay, so then it's almost like the rope. When the rope is pulled, they get pulled. They're pulled too because they're compromised. And then we have here now. This is a card of either election or multiples. So whatever is, the multiples, it could be the multiple children. And then the tree to me is the org chart. So the multiple fates of all the people connected to Trump change. This is a part of the change. So you see, it's almost like you're saying, when their fate changes, they are the ones who bear you see, like this is the wrong strategy. Oh, look, prison, directly prison card. So then they go to prison and they were drinking the Kool-Aid. So it's almost like the hammer, once it hits them.
Yeah.
Oh, did I mix this up? Okay. You just separate, yeah. I'm confused. So anyway, so see, so that's it. I feel like it's almost, and I almost feel like I see what you're saying, that they go with if you think of how the acceleration of Trump, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like he's like, oh yeah, this is like this, right? Oh, that's right, yeah. You see, even the marriage, the shady deals, the litigation, and very upsetting things. So if on the one hand they were kind of like promote, their role in the world was granted to them by Trump. When everything falls, they fall the hardest, right? Especially because they're younger too. So Trump is not going to be around that much longer anyway to suffer the consequences. They will be the ones bearing the burden. Okay, so
they will bear the burden. There's no question, and they have a long way to come to get over their negative patterns. Because we all have them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just seems like theirs have been irritated by having parents who don't follow the rules.
Yeah, no, and it's
amongst other things,
Yeah, and it's interesting to think of, like, when you think of life, in terms of all these. Still remember. Sorry, I'm traumatized with the astrology. That makes me a little. I remember the thing is like, well, you may think that this is a good thing, like, when people get things when they're young, or like things seem to be easier. But the flip side for you, they were telling me, like, is that because things are harder to come. I remember she always said, when it comes, it lasts, because you have the Saturn, the thing. It's like it may take a really long time to get there, but whatever it is, whenever you get it, it's very stable. It's not something. It's not like sudden thing out of nowhere. It's like you have to build it slowly. So it's kind of interesting.
Right.
So anyway, so that's like they are the opposite of like what they like seem like have the easy life in some ways, but not really. In the end, you pay the price.
Yeah.
So anyway, so now let's move. You said the Pluto, right?
Yeah.
Talk about Pluto.
Let's move on to Pluto. And then so. Basically, Pluto is a very different cup of tea. If anything, with Saturn, you feel cold. With Pluto, you feel a heat, a kind of underlying, underground, volcanic explosion getting ready to happen. It's sort of pressure building. When Pluto is about to pop, you feel that, a frog is on a hot tin plate, and then you stick a cover over it. There's nothing it can do to pop out except eventually explode. And often Pluto will do that. It will either there are lots of little mini transformations that occur, or it's one massive kind of explosion kind of thing. So what does Pluto stand for? It stands for power. So just like power is not necessarily bad, but it can be bad. It can corrupt. So Pluto stands for the uncovering of corruption as well. It stands for death and rebirth. So when you're looking at the ending or an elimination of something that has been ongoing for some time, you almost always want to look at Pluto, because that will give you a terminus. It'll give you an ending. It'll give you a, I can't go on like this anymore. We can't go on like this anymore. We are done. It's when you break up with the bad boyfriend, or you break up, or you finish a job that you just can't tolerate any longer. You find a way to finish it and complete it. Now, this doesn't mean it's always done in a pretty way. Sometimes it gets a little ugly, or sometimes it gets a lot ugly. And some of the things that we have to look at as we look at our power are things that diminish our power. So our obsessions tend to diminish our power, because we're not masters of our own, of ourselves when we're in obsessive or compulsive state of mind. But often Pluto stands for those psychological complexes and impulses that allow people to understand your motivations. And how can I use it against you if I want to have power over you? So people who are very heavily influenced by Pluto know how to play the right chess game. Are you going to play it safe? Are you going to say, I'm all in? They're 5 steps ahead of you because they know what motivates you. You're motivated by money. You're motivated by sex. You're motivated by whatever those things are. And they are not afraid to learn about it. They're sort of very open to understanding taboos. And Pluto's in all of our charts stands for combined resources or investments. And it takes the temperature of how people feel about those investments. So things like the stocks and the bond markets are ruled by Pluto in general. Our combined debt in general is a Pluto area. Places like Wall Street are generally run by Pluto. The tax system is run by Pluto. So a lot of people are afraid of Pluto on a level which kind of makes you feel like your survival instincts get engaged, put it that way. So a lot of people are very afraid when it comes to tax time. You know, if you just normally go ahead and you pay your taxes, you have nothing to worry about. If, however, you've been avoiding paying taxes for how long, or you've attempted to hide your money, whether it be offshore, or you're hiding your money in whatever currencies, or you've got money laundering going on, or whatever, things of that nature, then you're probably petrified, you know, of your tax situation. Pluto also rules sex in general. So any people that are motivated sort of highly by, you know, sexual matters because it makes them feel more powerful, or people that are particularly charismatic are Plutonian in some way because they have power over people. If you run into a really attractive man or woman, they may exert a sort of subliminal power over you because you're just basically attracted to that person, and your hormones take over and you're not thinking properly. So, you know, you can have the areas of Pluto which are complicated, like psychology and, you know, how do I invest what resources I have, and how do I, you know, what money market do I invest in, and all that kind of stuff. But they're not difficult on the level of death and rebirth. So there's like 2 different sets of Pluto concerns. The concerns that we have day to day in terms of how are we reacting in our intimate relationships? How do we get along with people, whether it be emotionally or sexually? How do we get along with people psychologically? How do we connect with them? And how do we deal with our personal resources so that we don't have survival issues? How do we keep our money? How do we plan for taxes and all that kind of stuff? But then there's this level where Pluto gets to its other level, which is dealing with gross abuses of power, dealing with the threat of death or the threat of survival, the abuse of people, whether it be sexual abuse, whether it be violence, and often you'll find, you know, a lot of people who are threatened by death, you know, you've got a terminal, you know, illness. They can develop great strength and endurance through surviving that. And, you know, they come out of the other end and they're stronger people for it. Or those people who have, for example, near-death experiences, again, are like that. But when you get into the sort of dark side of Pluto, which is, I'm afraid, the territory we're in right now, you get these sort of gross abuses of power. You get the people with tons of dark money. How do they use that to manipulate situations so they have greater resources? It's the sort of constant greed and feeding this sort of incredible beast. It's the sort of dark side. It's totally the dark side. And the only way that you can combat it, because we all have Pluto somewhere, the only way you can combat it is to become the master of your own impulses, to understand your impulses and to control them, to be aware of them. You don't want to repress them, but you want to be aware of them. You recognize them in other people. And rather than choosing to try to control them and manipulate them through recognizing their stuff and turning it on them. You recognize it for what it is, and in some ways help them to develop their resources, help them to develop their strength. However, as I say, unfortunately right now, we're dealing with the dark side of Pluto. So the key things to do in these stages are, Pluto can be a great detective on the positive side. It can investigate very well. You need, and I hope that there are some top flight investigators and detectives, ones that have not been scared off by the kind of, you know, the flushing out of the FBI or you know, the Trump administration trying to get rid of a lot of these national security experts, you know, at the top of the field. We're hoping for some really good people there. They don't have to be famous. They just have to be really good at what they do. And we may never know who they are, or we may find out 20 years from now who they are. But they're really good at investigating the dark side of money, the dark side of sex, the dark side of tax evasion, you know, all those areas. The other thing that we want to look at is these survival instincts that come up and where they're likely to pop up. Oil is one of the areas, I think, whether it be oil-rich countries or people who are involved with oil industries, are going to be maybe one area that can be threatened by the new structures coming in, the new technology coming in, and maybe want to keep the old ways of doing things in place. The other area that often is emphasized are things like nuclear research, nuclear power, nuclear weaponry, things like that explosion occurring in Russia, I would say is very much a Pluto type of, just like Chernobyl was at once upon a time. And, you know, there's nothing as scary, or very little as scary, as a nuclear explosion. I think we're all, you know, petrified that will happen someday, right? So the question is, when you're confronted by these incredibly complicated dark side Pluto issues, how do you react? And all you can do is sort of master your own impulses and investigate things to the best of your ability, and to use your own power to create a difference. You know, whereas with Saturn, it's more about control, understanding your own patterns of weaknesses and fears. Here it's not. It's really about developing personal inner strength and endurance and integrity. Integrity is probably Pluto's best aspect on the light side. So there are going to be people in this scandal at some point down the road. And I think you've had him before. I mean, I think Mueller's got integrity, and he's a Pluto person. There are positive Pluto people, and there are negative Pluto people. Okay, so let's look at the first set of dates connected to maybe perhaps looking at which side of Pluto are we going to be dealing with at the end or the twilight of this Trump administration. One is around October 14th, and the other one is around January 13th.
Okay, so just say it again. So can you just repeat the question? Say it again.
Okay, so
what's
at that moment, the sun, which is the light of consciousness, is connected to Pluto. So it may tell us which aspect of Pluto is going to be part of what eliminates this negative situation we've had with Trump. So what is going to eliminate him and his administration and his era and what he stands for? It's going to be Pluto, because Pluto eliminates. It destroys. It's the destructor. So the sun brings the light of day on it. So what is it going to be? Is it going to be his debts? Is it going to be taxes? Is it going to be his connections to organized crime, which is Pluto? Is it be connection to some sort of nuclear thing, some sort of oil deal? You know, are there mineral
I just wanted to
deals?
just wanted to.
What I'm saying?
Yeah, no,
Okay,
that's perfect. But I just wanted to say something before we went into the cards, because I forgot exactly when it was, but I think it was around the time when George Nader went to prison. The last time he went to prison, you know, like he's now, I think he's still in jail or whatever. But like, so there was one reading, I think, I don't even know that I even made it public, but it showed, it was amazing because it talked about how George Nader was the connection to all of the, you know, it's going to be much bigger than what is it, Iran Contra, because it's like the connection to the Saudi nuclear deal. Because at that moment I realized that, wow, because there was even an email among the people that are knowledgeable about this, that they said, oh, you know, the Saudis, this is the deal of the century. The Saudis are giving all this money if you help them build this nuclear technology. And that's what I thought. And I was like, then it connects to, you know, even goes back to Bush and, you know, and the whole thing is like, and you realize that, and even when I had this event with Boris, whatever, the quote unquote the spirit from Boris Berezovsky, he was explaining why oil was so important to the development of, you know, to Russia back starting in the 70s, because it gave them the currency literally to have an internal market, like to have a, you know, before it was just factories that fed the internal thing, but now it's like you have oil and you can, and that's why this whole, and I feel like my sense about the Trump presidency is that it's all about the oil culture, that the oil culture is the connection between the Kochs, the Bushes, why they, it's not just that I used to think, oh, Putin, you know, that he made their minds because of the, you know, evangelical thing. No, it's actually, they have true common goals, which is the, you know, the Arctic exploration and all of that. You know, they want to get to the very deep oil things, and they need to get it. That's how they feel like they're going to make, how they make their money, why they're going to these other countries. So it's kind of fascinating, you know, like you're saying, it's true. The goal or the drive of this administration seems to be that power of the, like you're describing, the Pluto. So anyway, so now that we said it, so let's go to the October 13th, you said, is that right?
October 14th. I mean, 14th, you know, it's going to be around the, I mean, yes. You give a date like this, you know, often with these dates, the moon picks up and it focuses energy a little more. So it sometimes can be slightly before, slightly after, but it's around then.
So it's kind of interesting that we're talking about this. This is the revelation of truth. This is this card upside down like this. Now the blonde woman here, sometimes it means kind of like the seductive woman, or the woman who knows, you know, uses seduction to get what she wants. And ironically, I just pulled another card for clarification. It shows anger. And then we have the man here, usually the connection with the cross here, I see it as sort of a person who's going to suffer losses or guilt. It means guilt in some way. And then we have, now the news coming in is a big development, something coming in, the revelation of truth. And this is power. Now this is the wait is too long. And then we have the messenger. And then we have, this is the heart, or it could be sexual stuff. It could also be the values. Now and this is the mad king, or somebody who has emotional instability, a friend, a negative letter, and then the baby usually is Trump. So what I find interesting to me here is that for some reason I keep thinking that Ivanka could be involved in something, because it feels that the heart in this case, for some reason to me, you could say, oh, it means that we were happy, but I do think that it's something that Trump cares about, right? Because the news about something, the news is happy, or the news about the heart connected to what? Trump. So I don't think this is necessarily about us. I think, you know, our like emotion, I think it could have something to do with Trump. And again, the revelation by someone that he may trust or have trusted. And here we have, now it's interesting because we have the weight has to, this is the, we could see that whatever, I feel like Trump is, it's clear that he's, if you observe him, he's trying to buy time, right? He's always pushing forward, trying to win something. And this would, to me, mean a defeat of some sort, the recognition that it's too late. You know what I mean? That this is really far too late, and this is a message, either some sort of, I don't know if it's, we'll see what this may be about. But then again, we have here this instability, increasing instability, and this could be either a friend or an ally that could have ratted him out. And again, this is the letter. So the messenger, if you look at this card here, brings, what does it bring? It brings a letter, right? That's what's in the pocket there. And so this, whatever this news is, it's really quite negative. And so it's very damaging to Trump. And my sense is that, and I could be wrong, of course, it's not 100% sure, but it's the sense that he realizes he's betrayed. You know, the moment when he realizes that, like, it's too late now, and the people around me are, you know, have their knives to my back. That's my sense. And I don't know if this is this is exactly, 100% correct. But
Yeah.
maybe we could look at, what was the other date? And is it further
Well,
down?
we have two other sets of dates
Uh-huh.
I wanted to look at because they are the two planets connected to Pluto
Uh-huh.
that are going to make the biggest impact for him and us with the United States chart.
Okay.
The first one is Pluto Mercury,
Mhm.
and when the country was born, Pluto and Mercury were in contact with each other.
Mhm.
So when it happens again, like
Mhm.
it's about to happen now, it generally refocuses us on some very important messages or information. And they often are financial in nature. It's interesting that we're seeing a lot of discs coming up here. But anyway, so Mercury again is associated with communication, accounting, financial instruments and information, bridges of understanding between people, strategic shaping of perception, decision making, and duality. Okay, so as Pluto connects to Mercury this time, it relates to our capitalistic system, our enormous natural resources that include things like oil, but also our tremendous abilities as a country with the people that we have here, those kinds of resources, and also our obsession with the accumulation of wealth, and perhaps at times holding that up as it may be too high a height. And so what are we asking during these periods? How much are we willing to prostitute ourselves for money? Are we acting as stewards of our natural resources, or is nature being raped? How can we maximize entrepreneurship without a succeed at any cost mentality? It's a very Machiavellian point of view, sort of like the ends justify the means. And I think that's a negative way to look at it. It's a much more positive way to look at it, is that we should be able to be, with enough data and information coming through, be in control of the decisions that we make and make the best decisions possible given that data.
Okay. So just to clarify, Victoria, what are the dates, exact dates for this?
The date for Mercury contact to Pluto is September 27th. So this week coming up is a big one.
Yeah,
So
because, okay, you know what, it's very interesting you're saying this, because, to me, it's very much this, like even here, all the bottom here is all finance, 5 Pentacles, all financial things. And to me, just looking at this, it would point to either some sort of alarm about the debt, what is it called, the deficit, or something connected to the tariffs, because you have here the mountain is blockages. Okay, it's blockages. It could also be the sanctions, but here we have the blockages and the recognition there's something wrong, something shady. Okay, and then we have here that the Trump was kissing someone's ass, and this has created a delay, and this is the person he may have whose ass may have kissed, and this is this negative surprise. So people are basically, how the media, or who, it's not the point to say who or however it's happening, that they thought, oh, look, Trump is just a crazy guy. He's just, that's who he is. That's how he does things. But then you're paying the price for his irresponsibility, right? So in some ways, there's a realization that either the tariffs have created a very negative surprise, and now they're reaching the markets, in other words. That's my sense, because then we have here the letter, which is some sort of information about something shady foreign. And then what I find interesting here is that we have, usually this card alone to me means the kids, and then we have again the partners. So it's something where, I would, if I were to try to guess what it could be, it's something where they negotiated for their family some sort of deal, and then they changed the foreign policy or the internal policy of the U.S. to benefit them. Because then we have here the quid pro quo, and then we have a man here. For some reason, I've been thinking a lot that maybe Jared could fall, especially with Netanyahu falling also. You see, this is an answer. So it could be either something about the sanctions I'm sorry, sanctions, or this could be a blockage is like some sort of like, document from the Federal Reserve or something that tells something about it's very worrying, because the thought upside down is worry, worrying about the debt and that we're sick. Like this sickness could be, that we're in a difficult position financially, and that we have been living a lie, because this is about lies when it's not upside down. So in some ways, it's like reality check. And the recognition that there is a price to pay for not taking Trump seriously, right? Now,
Yeah.
I mean, I think people were taking him too seriously in some ways and not seriously enough in others. It's like there was, I don't know what else, anyway, there wasn't much that we could have done in any way, but it's sort of like, it's the moment sort of like when you're in the restaurant and the bill comes and you realize, those people, the guests that like have too many, you're like, oh, I'm not going to have a glass of wine or anything because I'm saving money. Then there comes a person, orders 4 glasses of wine of the most expensive, and then you have to split the bill with the person. And you're like, oh my God. So, you know what I mean? It's so annoying, like how that is. But now it's much more than annoying. It's pretty serious. Yeah. That's what I would suggest. So this is, so remind me again, Victor, because I already.
That's Mercury-Pluto we're talking about. I had written down as possible ways to look at it for the U.S. disruption with the markets, which is something that came up with you.
Wait, I'm sorry. One second. I'm sorry, I'll interrupt you because the date is not, I don't remember this date that I just
did. Oh, I'm sorry, 9/27.
Oh my God, next week. So it's pretty serious week. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, well, go ahead.
Disruption with the markets, news about the whistleblower, because interestingly enough, he came out, or she came out, whoever it is, with the report on August 12th. I looked back at the dates. Like the previous month, Mercury was aspecting Pluto back in July and early August. It's doing it again on 9/27. So that would tend to suggest that there's still going to be news about the whistleblower at that time. And perhaps that has to do with this financial piece of what they're offering, whether that be information, because Mercury stands for information, or that is some sort of financial benefit that this person overheard.
Interesting.
Also, Mercury to contacts to Pluto can be connected to blackmail, financial or tax information, and manipulation of those areas.
Interesting. Oh, that makes sense. It could even be the taxes, right? That's what we're saying. This could be even be the taxes. So, but I'm actually, even without the card, just say they're kind of telling me here, well, there's gonna just hold on, because there's gonna be bombshells about Trump's finances. That could be, or like the deals he has done, or how willing he was to sell the country, like you're saying, to sell the country for cheap, or to change things just to benefit the people who supported him in the past. So
right.
So wow.
And so it happens 9/27, happens again on January 11th, 2020.
Okay.
So
those
are another key date.
We're just gonna take it down here, and then let's do sorry, I know I feel like I have such short term, but it's like what was it, the day of January you said now?
The 11th, around the 11th.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so 11th or 12th of January. Okay. Oh, look, interesting. This is the guy leaving, right? The guy you're saying that you think. Okay. So then. Okay, so. Wow. Yeah, so interesting. You know what let me just, I have to just get this out.
You got Pluto right there with his sickle.
Yeah, interesting. That is okay. So you know what it feels like to me, actually, that Nancy could be coming in, and just, it's interesting. Okay. So then we have, now this is like, this is the people celebrating. Usually, for some reason, again, I feel like it's connected to Trump's children, but it's just a group of people. And this is the public and the society. And then now this is interesting because this is the gamblers. And I tend to, that Trump, he had casinos, and that I feel like he's connected to the mob in some ways. So this information becoming public about the casinos or the mob back in the day, because the old lady upside, usually it's about the past, something that happened in the past. Yeah. So everything, and I always said, Victor, more, now it makes more sense more and more, but that when Trump leaves, we're not going to be celebrating. It does never look like it's going to be like, yes, oh my God, we're so happy. It's like, oh my God. People are shocked that they have to clean up out the mess that is left and everything that comes out of it. is shocking, and it takes a long time to rebuild. So then you have somebody leaving, and then conversation, and then we have this good woman here. That's why I think could be Nancy. Now, and then we have and there's two cards in this Italian type of card. There's two enemy cards, one of the male and the female. And the female card is considered the enemy that you know, the evil that you know, versus the evil that you don't. So it's the person inside our environment, if it's about the country. It's somebody who is an internal person who is actually the enemy, which I would think is for people associated with Trump and him and all that. And then this is the star upside down would be something like going sort of like the country was in the wrong direction, finances, permanent ending, and something travel. So what this suggests to me is also, Victoria, the whole thing with the sanctions. I also felt like when I would ask about what would happen, let's say to Russia, or like even could be, Saudi Arabia, I think let's just say to the Russia stuff connected to the elections, that eventually these people will be kicked out of the country or that they would be sort of like how they're treating Iran right now, right? Where there's like very severe sanctions, and anybody who does business with them is affected. So I would think that this is the woman putting a permanent ending. We have the foreign thing next to the death, and then we have the mafia type person with the gamblers, and everything is exposed. So that is the moment of when all these people are kind of expurgated out of the country, or they're the truth about the money comes out, and everybody who's connected to this money, or it's like boom, the end, permanent. It's like a permanent banishment. And again, this figure of the woman who's a good person. So you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So,
But I did want to mention to your viewers and also for you, Vladimir Putin fits in very strongly to this Mercury-Pluto period. So I think there will be news about him because he's got he's got a Mercury at 23 Libra. The United States has Mercury at 24 Cancer. So they're exactly connected to each other. I would assume that some of the endings will involve issues about calling him to judgment on some level. It doesn't stop. I mean, the Mercury-Pluto thing doesn't stop in January. It continues on for the next 2 years. So there will be repercussions for some time. I did also want to mention that Epstein had Mercury-Pluto. So he kind of dealt in blackmail and things of that nature, and dealt in, collecting problematic information about many powerful people. Roger Stone has Mercury-Pluto.
Oh, interesting.
All the sort of the dirty tricksters. So I think that's all. Those are a couple of people to look forward to during that period. If there's any news that might come out about any of them. But I did want to cover one last Pluto aspect, actually really two. One is to do with Venus contact to Pluto, and that's on October 1st. December 13th and February 29th, 2020. And that really has to do with the creepy sex stuff that we talked about last time.
Okay.
Sort of predations for females, payoffs of women, the sex trade. The thing that we have to think about when you look at where do people get this dirty money, the money that is dirty, because Mercury-Pluto can be dirty money specifically. It's not just dirty sex or sex that's inappropriate in some way or abusive or rape or whatever, but it's also dirty money. So where does that come from? It comes from drug trade, sex trade, weapons trade, all of that kind of stuff. So you've got also possibilities there that are going to be very ugly to look at.
So the first one is October 1st, right? You're saying?
Yeah, October 1st. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting here because to me this is like stuff, again, more dirty stuff coming out about the financial connections that Trump has to all of this, right? Because here we have just trying to execute something behind the, under the clouds, hidden, and this is there's a lot of money involved, and this is reiterated by this other card. This card is bank accounts, literally. Okay, so there's these shady bank accounts, in other words, some sort of shady money transfer, and this is burden. In other words, a lot of information about this deal. And now this is instability. It could indicate that, to me, this means that somebody could leave. Again, the idea of leaving, that Trump could leave, or that he could be, or that he had made a deal to create greater instability. I wouldn't, nothing. I don't doubt anything about Trump, and this is weakness is recognized, right? And because when things come out about the victory and the prize involved in the victory. So to me, this would indicate that it's some sort of payment. Oh, it could also be that you probably know the thing about how is the quid pro quo about the election. In other words, that there's a discovery of all this money and the deal that was made, and how people have information about Trump, and this comes out, and that is his weakness, because he. And I always remember that on, I think it's MSNBC and other channels, they talk about how Trump, the one thing that he hates, he's always attacking is the legitimacy of his election. He seems to be really afraid of people challenging the legitimacy. Then that's what it suggests here. There's something about the election was a quid pro quo. It's like, I gave you something, so give me something back. And that it's not like an election like we think of, like, oh, it's not an actual election. It's a transaction. That's it. That's all it is a transaction. And
right.
and all he's, this is like what's frustrating, that we see it happening, and that the whole Trump presidency is it's a giant transaction machine, right? It's like, that's all they do. They're like, okay, how can we find a deal, execute a deal, whatever. So
how can I make a quick buck?
Exactly.
It's totally Pluto consciousness all the time. How can I make more money? How can I get more stuff?
And the funny thing is always behind the scenes. It's always hidden.
Yeah.
And so.
How can I get underage girls? How can I, all the stuff that normal people can't get access to, and how can I then cover it all up so that I look just fine and dandy on the outside?
Yeah. So I was gonna say, so Victoria, so well, you said there's like 2 more dates, right?
So there was a Venus Pluto that you just did, and then the final thing, which is Saturn and Pluto come together. So we've been talking about Saturn in the first part, and now we just talked about Pluto. They come together on New Year's Eve, and they will be together through all of January and February of next year. So you've got the weight of the karma, the as you sow shall ye reap, with the eliminator of Pluto, the eliminator ability of Pluto, to destroy what it touches. And so I think it's a time of endings, uncoverings, and unfortunately, when you have these 2 planets together, you feel like you're between a rock and a hard place. There's nothing you can do, and also very little movement that you have. You're kind of, it's going to be, by then, it's too late for him to do anything, or anybody to do anything other than find a way to get rid of him. It ends up being uglier and uglier the longer it takes. So he's going to be forced. It's like a pincer movement that comes in and finishes it off.
So what I think is actually, it's interesting. I actually like this the way doing it now. As you're talking, I'm pulling the cards and then seeing, now seeing it with, like, I'm thinking about it as I'm pulling those cards out and then seeing the reflection. It's kind of interesting because it relates to, now it's like, I don't know, my memory is going on, but the thing that we just did, I forgot if it was just now or the one just before, where those people are exposed and kicked out of the country, right? There was one that we talked about just now. So it's exactly that, because what's funny is this is a new beginning. It's perfect for New Year's Eve, but then we have, again, the foreign people, and this is a great card for this moment. It's like important revelation. In other words, documents that suggest, that tell the truth, and the enablers. So the overall picture here is that all the people, because first we saw that the people who made, let's say Russia, right, connected to a foreign power, are all kicked out, and then we have the enablers being prosecuted or kicked out or banished, because then you have the people who took the offer. And what is this? The aggression. So the offer for the aggression, this is impeachment, and this is by law. So the law says leave, because one other thing that I wanted to tell you, this reminds me of this, and this is legal recourse, it would connects to this, and this is the friend. So they're all the people that are basically the people who, let's say, in Trump's cabinet, they suffer because then you have here the absence. They have to go, they leave, and there's a lot of sadness for them because it's almost like they're truly are vanished. And so actually I wanted to talk about this. Maybe this is maybe the end, you know, getting to the end, but it makes perfect sense.
It is the end, yeah.
Because Victoria, we were talking first when we started talking, right? You said one of the things that we all want is for it to end, right? And then today, like let's say nowadays is the beginning of the end, and then is the end of the true end. But what is fascinating to me here is that it suggests that when it ends, it's like it's really like, you know, and it's not September 11th, but it's something like there's nothing left. That was what is fascinating. Oh, and this is a lot
annihilation.
That's it, annihilation, exactly. Because this is what I remember, and hopefully I'm gonna close my eyes because I have to say it. I have to remember. So this is it. A lot of times I also have looked at this question about the Supreme Court. Like, what about the people who are appointed by Trump? What about Kavanaugh? And to me, this is the moment when not only is the presidency over, like Trump, let's say that Trump leaves, but that I think there's a strong possibility of annulment of, you know, because it's sort of like you have almost like they put an acid and remove, you know, like, you know, we always use this matter, like, okay, we want to put Clorox or like everything has to be, you know, in fact, disinfected, but that's the sense is that nothing, even though right now we're like, oh, it feels to them like that they could do whatever, they can get away with everything. When justice comes, maybe because it took so long to get here, it's annihilated. All the people are like, bye, see you later. You were like, you know, it's kind of like what they're trying to do with the refugees, like you have to leave the country, but they were going to do that to the people who are actually collaborating with Trump. And like, you know how like always, you know, those random people, what's the guy from Hungary, you know, those strange characters that kind of came out of nowhere, like the same thing. It's like you go, you know, just go back to the whole way, whatever, you know what I mean? Like it's like this dark, it's almost like the dark forces that come in the dark, like, oh, hi, I'm Sebastian Gorka. Yeah. And then they're like, now we have you know, call the guy who gets rid of the pests and they go away.
It's Terminator, exactly right. It's, you know what, Pluto is the Terminator. You know, you think of all those crazy movies with, you know, people coming in and shooting them up. I mean, that's what happens at the end of one of those Pluto movies is you've got, you know, the sort of annihilation of everything. You know, it's very, 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 you know, Reservoir Dogs or whatever. Yeah, so it's, I think the key thing to remember when we get to that point is I think everybody is going to be so exhausted, but also it's going to be important for us to learn the essential issue that's going on. That we're building toward a new consensus. It is a death and rebirth. So there's going to be an aspect of the ending of the Trump administration and what it stands for, and then what do we rebuild out of the ashes? Because that becomes the sort of the phoenix that rises afterwards. And I think that's going to be, we all have to put our thinking cap on and say, how are we going to develop beyond this? And you know, I know we're not there yet, but it does seem that, you know, we'll get signals of some of the main things that we have to deal with. And one of them, which happens to be in the United States chart, is a change in our value system. Fundamental change in what we really value as a society. And because, you know, one of the things that Trump has shown us is that he will do anything for a buck, as you say. And so will a lot of the other people around him. And there's just something fundamentally not right about that. And so, I mean, I think that's part of it. And we've allowed money to run our politics. You know, what are we really going to do? I'm not saying nobody can ever fundraise again, but what are we going to do when, you know, when we're confronted the next time? Now, I mean, not the next president, but somebody else who wants to come in and sort of throw his weight around. You know, how do we ensure against it in the future? So I think that because Saturn and Capricorn are going to be in Pluto. I mean, sorry, Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn are going to be acting together. There will be a time for us to re-look at our laws. You know, how are we going to just not only clean up all these negative things that have happened during the administration, but how are we going to create new laws which then allow us to protect ourselves from something like this happening again.
Wow.
You know, the never
fascinating.
again.
Yeah. No, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. No, makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've seen it also, like, you know, for the future. But oh my God, but this is amazing, Victoria. You know, this, you know what I mean? It's like amazing, it's very intense. So I feel like it explains so much, because I feel like for me, especially even the channel, most people watch it, is like, we want the answer today, like what's going to happen tomorrow, what about this that just came out. So this gives a bigger, you know what I mean, you will give a bigger
and you know what, I hope it's sooner, because there are a couple of big dates in December, which I feel will be maybe turning points that will create the ending. But the actual ending feels more January to me than it does December. But I think you are really on the edge in December. And you know, there is Christmas, and there's, you know, breaks with Congress and all that kind of stuff. You have to take all that stuff into account. And you know, they're not going to not go on their Christmas breaks because they're busy impeaching Trump. I mean, they should, but I don't think they're going to do that. I mean, I could see them decide to take an impeachment vote on the floor, either in December or in January. But by then, if they've played their cards strategically correctly, as I think Pluto wants them to do, if they've played their cards right, he will do anything to avoid that. And they will be able to make the deal they need to make then. That's my feeling. But I don't think he's yet ready to make his deal right now. Just like this very second, even though things are going totally haywire. And next week, as we've already seen, is going to be, you know, also pretty big news on a couple of different fronts, whether it be Saturn or Pluto. And even though he's got some big stuff coming up in the next month, he's dug in like a little tick, and we're going to have to use both Saturn and Pluto to come in and pick them off.
So, wow. So, oh my God, amazing. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Victoria.
And thank you for collaborating with me. I feel very honored. Thank you.
No, it's amazing. It's amazing. So we're gonna continue the conversation a little bit, and I'm gonna say goodbye to everybody. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Victoria. Okay. So good night. Okay.